good day to brew, baby? What is up, YouTube? It's Roy Millsy. Back with Talking Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew a version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us and my quest out brew the magic world. As always, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links down in the description. I'd really appreciate it. Today we're continuing on our Marvel Secret Lair Super Drop week, covering all the commanders brought with it. And today we're talking about Storm, Force of Nature. A Teamer Mutant Hero Flying Vigilance 3/4 that says whenever Storm deals combat damage to a player, the next instant or sorcery you cast this turn has Storm. A reminder that Storm is when you cast that spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn, and we may choose new targets for the copies. I think this is a really interesting commander in a lot of ways to me because we've seen things similar to this. Like, I think the first commander that came into mind for me when I looked at Storm was something like Calamax, right? Where when it's the first instant you cast while it's tapped, you copy it. So here's a kind of a similar thing, although Storm is a whole lot different than just copying one spell. In fact, Storm has a lot bigger of a ceiling than just copying it once. I think there's a lot of ways you can take Storm. What I tried to do in all reality was kind of set up that normal spell slinging engine, make sure we're getting a lot of value even from the spells that we're casting. Yes, it's very hard to get spell slinging value from spells that you copy, but that's okay because we still have a lot of other ways to give either more copies to those spells or some more Storm triggers to our spells, meaning that even if we only can get triggers off one spell that we cast, if we copy it 4 or 5 times, a lot of value can be brought that way. And then we'll talk about just some of the spells that I picked out to play with Storm. I think there's a lot of ways to take this deck, and we'll talk about that kind of as we run through it. But I think it's important to say there's a lot of options. But as far as spell slinging goes, I think the most important part of our spell slinging payoffs here is we want to try to find as many Magecraft outlets as we can. Or that Magecraft says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, do X. And so it's important to find them because then with our Storm triggers, right, we can get more of them. Dika will make us a fractal that's a 0/0 with X counters on it, where X is the spell's mana value. Stormkiln Artist will make us a treasure whenever we cast or copy something. So you can see some options there. I like Dika does have the option to give Storm unblockability if we are playing against opponents with a bunch of flyers, but I don't expect that to be too much of a problem. One of my favorite new cards that I think could be fun here is something like Storm Splitter. This is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you to make a token that's a copy of Storm Splitter and exile at the beginning of the next end step. So allow either you to put a bunch of Storm Splitters into combat together or even use them to tap for other abilities or even mana to cast certain spells. There's a lot of options which you can do with Storm Splitter, but it's a very interesting outlet for it. Veyron's Voice of Duality, its Magecraft trigger is going to put a buff on it until end of turn, and then casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell that would cause a triggered ability of a permanent you control to triggers an additional time, meaning that hopefully all these other spell outlets we have can get triggered multiple times instead of just one, giving us more and more value. Brought in Zephi from that Prismari commander deck because I feel like it could be a ton of fun. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get a scry 1. If the mana value is 5 or greater, you get an elemental token, and if it's 10 or greater, it deals 10 damage to an opponent chosen at random. Zephi is going to pay off really well because when we get to talk about the spells I want to copy, I've put in a few big damage red spells, so that'll work out really well with that. And then Arcane Bombardment feels like a great one here because what it's going to do is allow us to get spells underneath it that we can cast for free and get more and more triggers. And the cool part here is we get to cast the copies for free on Arcane Bombardment, meaning that we can get a lot more Storm triggers and a lot more fun out of Arcane Bombardment on future turns where we can get a bunch of spells underneath it and just go off. But I think the important part is not just resting on just giving a spell Storm once. I think there's a lot of ways we can either make sure that a spell gets copied more than that or has Storm more than that. And so what I tried to do was put a bunch of outlets together that can do that. You have something like Chandra's Hope's Beacon. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it, you may choose new targets for the copy. This ability only triggers once per turn. So that first spell we cast each turn with Chandra out is going to get copied, and that's great, right? Especially when we put a bunch of mana into a big spell, or we're doing something that's beneficial for us, we can do that. Rawl, Crackling Wit is going to grow as we cast non-creature spells. We can make the otters that can get bigger as we cast our spells, but if we can get Rawl up to its -10, we get to draw 3 and then give all of our spells Storm, meaning that actually that spell we give Storm, or that trigger we get with Storm when we deal damage, can then get the Storm ability and have double Storm, which is pretty great when it comes to the spells that you can cast. Delina to me just looked like a ton of fun. Make a copy of Storm. Each of them hitting is going to cause another of their triggers to go on the stack, right? Giving us a spell multiple instances of Storm and just allowing you to take real advantage of that next spell that you cast, which I want to get out of the way, I think is where this deck shines, is taking advantage of knowing what spell you want to cast, set it up, and execute it. This deck is going to do good at creating a ton of value, but the thing is, you have to know what you want to cast and what you're going to do with it, and I think that's where the deck's going to excel. Sagashima and Spark Double can both be copies of Storm, allowing you to get multiple Storm triggers to go off, right? Giving multiple opportunities for that ability. And then Galvanic Iteration says whenever you cast your instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it, choose new targets with the copy. So here's a way to just get another copy out of a key spell when you want to do it. And the nice part about that Galvanic Iteration is you can flash it back, giving you basically 2 uses of Galvanic Iteration. Storm King's Thunder is probably one of my favorite copy spells because it can get very out of hand. For X and triple red, you get to give your next incident sorcery you cast this turn X copies, and you choose new targets for the copies. It does not take very long and very many spells for you to realize where Storm King's Thunder can be a massive gain in value, depending on what you're going to cast. There are some fun spells in here that can mill opponents' libraries out, deal a bunch of damage, force a bunch of things to happen. There's just a lot of ways we can take advantage of that. Twinning Staff says whenever a spell would be copied 1 or more times, copy it that many times +1. So here we go, more copy for that. And then Thousand Year Storm just gives all of our spells, instant sorcery spells, Storm, but only for instant sorcery. So not bad either, just making sure that we get, again, more copies of these things. I know it seems redundant, but what I think you are going to have a tough time understanding before you start dealing with Storm or copying spells, if you've never done it before, is that you need to have 10 or 15 of these abilities in your deck so you can see at least 1 or 2, get them on the board, get them set up. So once you start going off, you'll see the difference of it. But as far as the spells we want to copy, this is the one section where I'll tell you, you could make this deck however you want to make it. I tried my best to pick damage-based spells because I think they make the most sense because you can get the highest amount of damage out of them. But I think there's a lot of ways you could approach this section to make it the way you want to make it. Chandra's Condition says you have a creature deal damage equal to its power to each creature in each opponent. So even if Storm's just a base 4/4, you pick her. She's dealing damage to everybody at for 4, and then this copies as many times as you cast spells before it. That's something that can get very out of hand. I mean, obviously you would need 10 total copies of these to burn the entire table out. But I mean, over the course of multiple turns, the number of the copies you really need, it goes down. Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So the world I would be thinking of is trying to cast this for 3, so 11 mana total. You deal 15 damage to 3 targets, and as long as you can copy this twice, you have the chance of just burning out the table on 1 spell. Yes, 11 mana, but still 1 spell. Elemental Eruption, making a bunch of dragon elemental tokens with flying and prowess, and you get Storm baked on it, plus potentially that Storm from when Storm deals damage, so you can see that can go off. Fiery Confluence, you choose 3, so you can choose the middle mode 3 times, dealing 6 damage to each opponent, and then, obviously we only need a couple copies of this to deal real damage to our opponent. Ignite Memory seems kind of fun. It says target player reveals a card from their hand at random, and it deals damage to that player equal to the number of equal to its converted mana cost or its mana value. And has Storm. This is a fun way. If you know when your opponent is playing big creatures or big spells, you can target them down and just try to deal a bunch of damage that way. Geysimulating Inferno deals X damage to each up to 3 targets. You can pick all your opponents and just make X as big as you can. Get copies. I mean, you can start to see where these mass damage red spells can really get to what we want to do. And then the slide that might anger a couple people, but we have to talk about it because it is an option for what you want to do in the deck. You have options like extra turn spells, both Time Warp and Stitch in Time. can take your extra turn, allowing for more storm attacks and more storm triggers. There are not a lot of games where if you were to resolve a time warp and get a couple of copies of it, the game probably isn't over by the time that you're done taking your extra turns. It's something that the community has a mixed opinion on, but it is a option in a spell based deck, and an option to kind of push your value forward. And then probably one of my favorite spells to copy is Tasha's Hideous Laughter, a 3-mana blue sorcery that says each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player exiles cards with mana value 20 or more total. What this is going to do is mill your opponents, but it mills them into exiles. There's no way for them to get them back. There's no way for them to get that back. And this will also get around protection like the shuffled Eldrazi Titans that reshuffle your library back in, or your graveyard back into your library. If a deck's very low to the ground, Tasha's Hideous Laughter is probably going to burn out a ton of cards from their deck. If you're playing against a high mana value creature deck, this isn't going to mill too many, probably. But when you start copying this, then you have a chance to really hit a lot of cards out of their deck and really put them behind. I have had Commander games where I've been able to copy Tasha's 4, 5, or 6 times, and it's very hard not to mill a player out at that point, because you just have to hit 20 minimum. So let's say I have 19 and I flip an 8, and that makes it into to 26 or 27. Well, I hit 20, now they're gone. It doesn't matter whether I go over 20, as long as the minimum I flip is 20 or more, then those are all exiled and you keep going. It's a fun spell, and if we can copy it a couple times, it can get really tough to deal with. I like something like Atarka's Command. 3 damage opponent, put a land from your hand on the battlefield. Creature's getting a buff, or opponents can't gain life this turn. But really, 3 damage and putting a land from your hand on the battlefield, and get to do that a bunch of times if you have a bunch of lands in your hand, or if you're drawing a bunch of cards through casting spells. This is a great way to deal damage and get some value on the board. I think Delayed Blast Fireball makes a ton of sense. If you were to cast it from exile, it deals 5 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. So if you were to foretell it, or cast it off something like Arcane Bombardment, or something like a way to cast something out of our graveyard, well, then there's a lot of spells that will let you take a spell out of your graveyard, exile it, and then cast it from exile. Well, then we can do that with Delayed Blast Fireball and just get a ton of damage in. I think Grape Shot's the classic Storm card a lot of people are going to be looking for here. Getting a bunch of single points of damage in can be really helpful to pick off certain things or deal damage right to our opponents in the combinations we want. Price of Progress seems really important in a format like ours, where a lot of people are playing non-basic lands. It says it deals damage to each player equal to twice the number of non-basic lands that player controls. As a warning, this will hurt you as well, so you kind of have to be a little bit careful. I've tried to build the deck with more basic lands than I normally do, just so that we don't have as much of an issue here. But I think we have the option to use this when needed. This doesn't always have to be our first thing that we want to use with Storm, but it could be a good thing to get a little bit of damage in. Prologue to Pheresis gives each opponent a poison counter and draws you a card. Remember that if an opponent were to get 10 poison counters, they'll lose the game automatically. So this gives you an option to build up poison counters on your opponent. There are more cards like this in these 3 colors if this is something you're interested in. I just put the 1 in there to show us what it could do, and then you could gain more options from there. And then Weather of the Storm just feels great. Gain 3 life in Storm. This is probably going to end up gaining you 9, 12, 15 life the turn that you cast it, especially with other spells that turn and then Storm's ability. So I think this could be a good way to just refill your life total a little bit, keep yourself alive if you're worried about people swinging back at you or some damage in combat. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. I mean, at the end of the day, this is my version 1.0 shot of this deck, and there's a lot of things we can learn in testing. I think the 3 cards on the screen are going to look really odd to older players, but it's to show you that there's different approaches to how we could do this. The first thought I had for Storm, to be 100% honest, when I read it, was Dragon's Approach. I know there's a lot of people that might have felt cheated if I just made this a Dragon's Approach deck, but Dragon's Approach is a very interesting strategy. So you could play as many cards named Dragon's Approach in your deck as you want, and it says it deals 3 damage to each opponent, just straight off the rip. And then you can exile Dragon's Approach and 4 more from your graveyard to go get your choice of a dragon from your deck and put it on the battlefield. Dragon's Approach is generally just good because you're playing ways to copy it or deal more damage, and that's 3 every time. So at minimum, if Dragon's Approach is the only thing that I copy, let's say I play 1 spell before it and then Dragon's Approach, and 1 copy, that's 6 damage of combat. Well, if I'm playing multiple Dragon's Approaches per turn, now this damage is compounding, and if I had 30 or 35 copies of Dragon's Approach, making sure that I'm always getting into more of them, you can start to see how that damage stacks up. I didn't want to do something that gimmicky, I guess. I kind of wanted to do something more general, but I could see a deck like this being a good idea for something like Dragon's Approach or Slime Against Humanity next to it. This is a spell that makes you an ooze token and puts X counters on it, where X is 2 plus the total number of cards you own in exile or in your graveyard that are oozes or Slime Against Humanity. So each slime you cast and then goes to the graveyard is going to grow the next few slimes. And my thought is every turn you're now getting 2, 3, 4 of these tokens. No, the number doesn't go up exponentially because there's still only one slime or 2 slime or 3 slimes in your graveyard. But the point is you're getting multiple instances of them every time, and that can build up your board state. There's a lot of support here in Teamer for +1/+1 counters, so I think you could play into this way. There are also other spells that would be beneficial. I think Slime, right, could also be another way to go. And then another fun card that I really enjoy and I think could be playable here, something like Prisoner's Dilemma. So it says each opponent secretly chooses between Silence or Snitch, and then the choices are revealed. If each opponent chooses Silence, this deals 4 damage to each of them. If each chooses Snitch, it deals 8 to them. But if they don't all choose the same thing, it deals 12 damage to each opponent who chose Silence. I think this is a really interesting card because it plays on the table, forces them to choose without really knowing what everyone's going to do. And a couple copy of this, even if they learn their lesson the first time, a couple of copies of this can really deal out some big damage. And remember that I'm not playing a ton of damage modifying things in this deck, but if you really wanted to go towards just solely dealing damage to each opponent with red spells, you could really pay into damage modifiers and really make sure that your spells are hitting hard. But let's get into our playtest. That's one of the things we do the best here on the channel, so let's have some fun. Keeping a 3-lander with Ice Storm, one of the cards from the Secret Lair, which can destroy lands. Rakish Claw, Rakish Claws, 1,000-Year Storm, and then Stronic Resonator, which can copy Storm's ability, making it go off more than once, which isn't bad. Turn 1, we'll get the island in. I guess there's not much we can do there. Turn 1, I guess we're just missing a green source for Storm. So we need to make our way that way. We'll get Stronic Resonator down. We still haven't found it. So we're working our way towards it, but we still haven't found it yet. This could be a teeny bit awkward. I think I'll play the Fire Island instead. Just in case we need to sack and draw a card. Okay, well, I mean, Veyron's helpful, but it's not exactly what we were looking for. We'll get Veyron down. I guess this could still get us a card next turn with Psychotic Fury if we truly don't find another green source in the deck. We do have a good amount. I made sure that the ratios were right, but every now and then, you get the odd draws and you don't find what you need. We didn't get it. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. So let's play the Psychotic Fury on Veyron, giving it double strike to draw a card. We've got 2 mana left this turn. We could do the Rakish Claws, but, I mean, it's a what? It's a 4/4 with double strike, so we could take a big attack here. We could always double up on its ability, making it a 6/6, but okay, well, this is unfortunate. I think I would pass the turn. I'm kind of thinking about sacking this Fire Islet to go draw a card. Again, we need a green source, and I'm very surprised we haven't found one yet. Okay, yeah, that's a problem. We'll sack the Fire Islet to draw. We draw a Prologue Phresis. We'll do that to draw a card. Everybody's going to get a poison counter. Eek. Okay, well, we washed here. I try not to do as many of the washes as I can on camera, but unfortunately, I had picked the hand. I thought it looked okay. I thought we could find enough draw to get a green source, but I guess not. So let's re-go here and find us another one. Here we go. Here's a better hand. 4-lander with all of our colors, Galvanic, Chandra, and Twinning Staff. So let's do this one. I'm not going to cut that. I think it's important to see, even when a deck breaks down, because it shows you what options you could have, what you tried to do, and what you can find for it. So we drew, we'll put the Cinderglade in, tap there, and move on to turn 2, just so that way we start having things like Hinterland Harbor come and untap. We'll play that Arcane Signet. So we're on our way up. This is going to lead to a turn 3 Storm. And we see Jeska's Will, a great spell to copy. You choose one, but if you draw your commander, you can pick both instead. Add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, and exile the top 3, and you can play them this turn. So Storm can't attack this turn, but that's a-okay. We're already ramping our way up on mana, and I think we're in really good shape. 5 mana here. Let's see, we could do the Twinning Staff, but we won't have enough mana for something like Jeska's Will. I love the idea of going on something like Jessica's Will, and it could potentially net us upwards of 14 mana, right? We would just have to make sure we keep enough other colored sources around so we could cast multiple things. But I think that's what I'm trying to do. Storm here on turn 4 is probably going to be able to hit somebody for sure. And then we'll cast Jessica's Will, which is going to get a copy of it. So I would have a tough time believing that an opponent doesn't have 7 cards in their hand at this point, or that someone doesn't on turn 4. But yeah, let's say even at worst that it's 6, getting 12 mana. I mean, we could play Chandra, we could play Zephi. Like if I do 1, 1, 2, 3, I've still got 2 other colors of mana, so that's 6, 10. Renikis copying Storm. And I mean, that's still a great turn. 1 turn of just copying 1 got us Chandra, and that Chandra could have actually given us more mana. But that's okay. We could set up for another turn to keep the party going. You could always exile there, but I didn't want to go too deep because we already played our land for turn. I didn't want to nuke a bunch of cards that I couldn't play. I think we just gotta be careful sometimes what you choose to do, or when you're doing that impulse draw. But getting in the next turn, we see Tasha's, which is a great card to cast. The only thing we would need right now is another mana to play like Twinning Staff and Tasha's. But here's the fun part. I could Galvanic Iteration. Galvanic could... Did I get the copy on the Storm there? I don't know if I would. We'll go past that for now. I think I still have to. We still have to cast 1 thing for Storm to get us a copy. So that is on me for the first turn. But we'll keep going here. So I would play Galvanic Iteration. It's going to get copied by Chandra. So the next instant sorcery spell is going to get 2 extra copies. 1 from Galvanic, 1 from the 2 copies of a Galvanic. That's going to give us a Scry from Zephi, and an island's perfectly fine. We would go to combat. Both of our Storms would attack, giving the next spell we cast double Storm, right? And then I would cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter main 2. We can always tick up Chandra here to get the extra mana if need be. So it would get 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4 copies of it. So everybody's going to take that and mill a bunch. I mean, at this point, yes, we ran out of spells in our hand, but we'd get to scry again. We'll put this on the bottom just because we can always, use Chandra's ability next turn to get some draw. This is a big hurdle for now our opponents to have to deal with, getting, 80 mana value, 100 mana value of their spells nuked from their libraries. And this should push us to a point where they can get rid of Storm, but I think they're in trouble. And all we need to do now is do another big turn of value, and I think we're in good shape. I mean, Storms are in the air. They'll be able to deal damage. If I can start dealing out some damage, hopefully. But again, I expect this to have milled a lot of our opponent's libraries. And then we see Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt is an option for spell, but I think this turn I would go ahead and just +1 Chandra to exile the top 5. Well, there's all our lands. Until the end of our next turn, when you cast an instant sorcery, we can cast an instant sorcery from among them. So I would go ahead and play... Let's see. I need the mana, right? If I want to play this time where I'm not going to have the option. So I think I would just go to combat, attack with both of these guys, get the double Storm. See, I haven't cast the spell before it, so I don't think I would get the Storm the way I thought I would. But I still think taking the extra turn is worth it. That's going to at least copy once because of Chandra, giving us 2 extra turns. Zephi is going to see that 5 mana value spell, giving us 2 elementals, right? Because we're casting it and then copying it. And then now we have 2 extra turns to keep ourselves going. Chandra can continue to do that ability, more and more if we wanted to. Try to just have the ability to deal damage on herself. And I think that's kind of a good spot to stop for this playtest, because I think with 2 extra turns, we'll be able to keep kind of chaining these together, especially with 2 Storms. But I do think I misplayed Storm on the first one, reminding myself that you copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. It doesn't have to be an instant or sorcery, but it just has to be a spell. So I think I had played Arcane Signet the turn before, so I don't think I would have had a copy of that Jessica's Will. But that just goes to show you why sometimes reminding yourself on the way that these things work is really important. So that you're making sure you do, you know, your abilities and your spells the way you're supposed to. But we'll get into playtest, I guess, technically 3 here, since I nuked that first one. Keep it a 2-lander with Farseek. So we've got at least 3 lands. We would ideally want another one. Play the Cinderglade in tap, since it's probably going to come in tap in order. We see Brain Freeze milling a player for 3 cards, so not too bad. All right, we'll get that Yavimaya Coast down, and we'll play that Farseek. I think it makes sense to get this out of the way, get that extra mana in, and that way we can make sure we get Storm down and get the party going. We've got lots of ways in the future to play some good spells. So here on turn 3, we'll get the Dreamroot Cascade down and get Storm down. So that way in our next turn, we can start the fun, start the process. Rootbound Crag is going to come in on tap, so we've got 5 mana. The question is, do we go big here, or do we try to set up? Because we could play something like Dika and set up for next turn. You know, getting some other tokens, getting some more tokens on the board, getting some more board presence. That I think that I would look at the board. If people are moving pretty slow, I think I just play Dika here, go and hit somebody with Storm anyway. But I think this sets me up for next turn. If people are moving pretty fast, I could see the world where I play something like Otterball Antics before combat to get the Otter, and then attack with Storm and play the Stitch in time, getting a copy of it, trying to take an extra turn and kind of starting the process that way. But I think if it's me at most tables, I'm probably playing Dika and getting that process started. So we come into turn 5 with Dika now, so we're going to start making fractals whenever we cast spells. I think slip-throwing Storm makes sense. Make it unblockable, draw a card. That's going to give us a 1/1 fractal. But now we're up to 1, right, on our Storm count. I kind of like the idea of playing something like Stitch in Time this turn, but we don't have to. I mean, we could always... I've got 4 mana left. We could do like Otterball Antics plus Brain Freeze. We could try to go come back out and do something like Prismari Command to try to draw 2, discard 2, and make a treasure. We could do those twice, you know, draw 4, discard 4, make a treasure, set up our hand for next turn. I think there's a lot of options, but I'd go in and attack with Storm. And my head tells me something like Prismari Command would be really good. So draw 2, make a treasure, make a 3/3 fractal. I'll pitch Stormcelt Artist. Is going to be great getting us more treasures. I think we're just going to have to lose a card or 2 here. I love Ice Storm, but some people don't always like lands getting destroyed, so I'll pitch that one, and then we'll pitch the Otterball. We can always flash it back to get Otterball back, and then we'll go do it again. 2 more. Another 3/3 fractal, another treasure. Let's see, I'll pitch Grape Shot, and I will pitch... Prologue seems nice, working our way up there. I guess we'll pitch Felwar Stone. So now, right, we got a couple fractals out of it this turn, a couple treasures waiting around for next turn, and you can just see how this specific scenario, my goal there was to try to build up our board state, so for next turn we have more resources. We see Irenicus' Val Duplication can get us multiple copies of Storm, so that's not bad. If I Irenicus before combat, making another Storm, then I could cast a spell after combat and get some value there. But I think I will just Stormkiln Artist. Now, every time I cast or copy a spell, I'm going to get a treasure. I would go to combat, you know, attack with Storm. I think there's a world where somebody probably doesn't have a flying deck that we can get in for damage. I've got 3 mana left. I kind of like the idea of something like Brain Freeze, just to have mill a bunch of cards, but I'm going to make a bunch of fractals and a bunch of treasures, right? So if I do this, right, mean 2, I got to get rid of one of the treasures to do it. It has Storm, so it's going to get copied once from its inherent Storm, and it's going to get copied once from our opponent's Storms, or Storm's triggered ability. So I'm going to make 3 2/2 fractals. So my thought here is now we're kind of setting up this board of fractals to basically keep this party going, right? Keep the board state on hand. The Brain Freeze mills any opponent we want there for 9. Now We've got treasures building. I mean, our goal is to try to use something like Prologue to get as many poison counters on our opponents as we can. Stitch in Time can get us some more turns. I think we're building good into the mid game here of trying our best to set up one of these board states. Next turn, my thought would be something like Arenicus to copy Storm. That'd be our first spell that we cast so we can make sure Storm's online. And then Storm hits, we could do something like Stitch in Time, take an extra turn again, even though we have to flip for Stitch in Time. If we have 3 or 4 copies of Stitch in Time that we're casting, there's a good chance we're going to hit on more than one of them. Eve's a fun idea in this deck. It has Storm. It isn't legendary if it's token, and it enters with a +1/+1 counter for each other ooze you control. This is in here just because it inherently has Storm. Of course, this would work really well with that Slime idea as well. But even here, this is nice because if you were to cast this, on a turn, in a turn where you play a couple spells, now this is going to get a couple copies of itself and be another engine that we can get down and get going. But let me know, what do you think of Storm down in the comment section below. I thought this was a fun deck. I had really fun brewing it and trying it out. I think there's a lot we can still learn about it, but I think that's what's fun for us as brewers, is figuring these new commanders out, tinkering with them, and trying to find the decks we like the most. But let me know what you think about Storm, and we'll catch you guys later.